I'm Kate, 27F, and my mom, Susan, has been everything to me. She's my confidant, my role model, my greatest supporter. Growing up with her as a single mother, I saw her sacrifice endlessly to give me a good life. It was just us against the world. She worked 2 jobs, always made time to listen, and somehow managed to turn our tiny apartment into a place that felt like home. Now, I'm watching her slip away, and every day feels like a fresh heartbreak. The first signs were so small that I barely noticed. She'd forget where she put her keys or would repeat questions within a few minutes of asking them. We joked about senior moments, but deep down, a shadow of worry started to grow. She was only 63, too young for this to be happening. Then came the day she didn't remember the street she'd lived on for over a decade, and I knew something was seriously wrong. After months of testing, the official diagnosis came: early onset Alzheimer's. I remember hearing the doctor's words as if they were coming from underwater. I felt like I'd been thrown into some surreal nightmare. Memory loss, cognitive decline, no cure. Those words sank into me like stones. My mother, the strongest woman I knew, the woman who held me through every challenge, was facing something that no amount of love, strength, or resilience could fix. From then on, I started noticing every single change, every tiny sliver of her slipping away. The little things turned into big things, forgetting names, mixing up memories, staring blankly at places she should have recognized. One day, she looked at me and asked, "Who are you waiting for?" as if I were a stranger in her own home. It was a gut punch, but I forced myself to smile, to play along, while my heart shattered inside me. At first, I tried to push through it alone, keeping everything to myself, but I could feel the toll it was taking on my life. I started showing up late for work, exhausted and distracted. I was afraid to leave her alone for too long, terrified she'd wander off or have one of her lost days. Friends would check in, but it was hard to explain the slow-motion grief of watching someone you love fade away, inch by inch. There was one night I'll never forget. I'd gone over to her place for dinner, something we'd done together every week since I moved out. She was cooking, the smell of her spaghetti sauce filling the kitchen, a recipe she'd taught me when I was a kid. Then she stopped, mid-stir, and looked at me with this lost expression. "I don't know what to do next, Katie," she said, her voice trembling. She couldn't remember the recipe she'd made 1,000 times. I wanted to burst into tears, but instead, I picked up the spoon, smiled, and walked her through the steps, as if it were our little secret. The hardest part is that Alzheimer's doesn't follow a straight line. There are days when she's almost her old self, cracking jokes and calling me Katie Bug, like she used to. I'd start to hope, to think maybe the diagnosis was wrong, that she was just tired. But then there'd be other days where she'd look right through me, or worse, days where she'd be afraid of me. She'd lock herself in her bedroom, calling out for her mother, convinced I was someone coming to hurt her. And all I could do was stand outside the door, whispering that I loved her, that I'd never leave her. I tried bringing her into my world, involving her in little outings or projects to keep her connected. I thought that if I filled her days with love, memories, and reminders of who we were, she'd be okay. But the disease was relentless. She started confusing decades, thinking I was still a child, or worse, that I was her sister instead of her daughter. I was becoming a stranger in her eyes. One evening, she got stuck on a memory from my childhood. She kept asking if Katie was safe, genuinely confused and worried about my younger self, even though I was standing right in front of her. I spent hours sitting with her, reassuring her, showing her photos to prove I was grown and safe. But nothing seemed to reach her. That night, I cried myself to sleep, realizing she was holding on to a memory of me she could never update. Each time I go over, it feels like a gamble. Will she recognize me, or will she stare blankly, trying to piece together who I am? I hold my breath before I knock on her door, preparing myself for either scenario. It's exhausting, but it's also a kind of strange privilege. I'm still holding on to my mom, still bringing her pieces of herself, even if she doesn't remember. Then came the family reunion. I thought maybe seeing everyone she loved together might bring her some clarity, some joy. But it was like sensory overload. She looked at her siblings, her own nieces and nephews, like they were strangers. Every familiar face seemed to be a puzzle she couldn't solve, and she began to panic, accusing people of plotting to take her home. She turned to me and asked, "Who are you? Why are you doing this to me?" I stood there, my heart breaking, as she clutched my hand with tears in her eyes, begging me to take her away from these strangers. It was the clearest sign I'd ever seen that Alzheimer's had stolen her past, her family, and now, me. Now, I'm her full-time caregiver. I've learned how to juggle my work and my second job, a job that includes everything from keeping track of her medications to making sure she eats. I've set up cameras in her house, alarms, anything that might help me keep her safe. But the weight of it all? It's beyond anything I could have imagined. Some nights, when she's finally asleep, I sit beside her bed and tell her stories. I talk about all the moments we shared, from her favorite jokes to the road trip we took that ended with a broken-down car and the best burger of our lives. I talk to her as if she's listening, as if the mother I knew is still in there, somewhere, just beneath the surface. One morning, I walked into her room and found her looking through an old family photo album. She was staring at a picture of the two of us when I was 5. She didn't recognize herself or me, but she touched the photo, smiling softly. In that moment, it was like she was connecting with some tiny part of her soul, even if she couldn't name it. I didn't interrupt. I just watched, grateful for a small, quiet moment where she seemed at peace. It's been a long, painful journey, but every so often, there's a flicker of the mom I remember. She'll laugh at something silly, or hum an old song she used to sing when I was a kid. And I cling to those moments, collecting them like treasures in a world that keeps taking everything else away. Every now and then, I wonder if I'll ever forgive myself for feeling moments of resentment, for feeling like my life is on hold. But I know I won't leave her side, no matter how hard it gets. Because for as long as she's here, I'll be here too, carrying her memories for both of us, holding on to every precious fragment of the mother I once knew. And maybe, just maybe, when she looks at me with those lost eyes, she feels the love that has always been there, holding us together, even as everything else fades away.